10 years ago, she fell in love with a man, and he vanished without a word. 10 years later, that same man walks into the conference room of the restaurant where she works, as the new boss. But what stunned her wasn't his appearance. It was a truth she never expected. He hadn't left her. He had bought the entire building, just to find her. Please like and comment with the city you're viewing from, so I know how far this story has progressed. The morning it all came apart, Lena Whitmore was standing in the dry storage room counting wine inventory with a pen that kept running out of ink. She scratched the ballpoint across her wrist twice, got a faint gray line, and wrote the number anyway. Chateau Margaux, 2018, 11 bottles. She moved to the next shelf. Her back hurt. Her feet hurt worse. She'd been here since 6 in the morning, which meant she'd slept maybe 4 hours the night before. And the coffee she'd grabbed from the prep station had gone cold somewhere between the walk-in cooler and the third argument with the morning sous chef about mushroom delivery. This was her life. She'd built it deliberately, the way you build a wall, brick by brick, with intention, making sure every layer was set before you added the next. Noir House had been a wreck when she'd taken the GM position 7 years ago. Chronic turnover, a kitchen that ran on chaos, front-of-house staff who treated guests like interruptions. She'd fixed it, not elegantly, not without casualties, but she'd fixed it, and somewhere in the process the restaurant had become the thing that held her together instead of the other way around. She didn't have much else that did that job anymore. She scratched the pen against her wrist again and kept counting. The call came at 8:47. Marcus, her assistant manager, knocked twice on the storage room door before opening it, which meant he already knew she wasn't going to like what he had to say. "Ownership meeting," he said. "Main dining room, 9 o'clock. Lena looked at him over the rack of Burgundy. "We had one last month." "This is a different kind." She waited. "We got sold," Marcus said. He kept his voice flat, but his jaw was doing something tight and controlled. "The sale finalized yesterday. Nobody told us because the acquisition team wanted it quiet. Apparently the new owner wants to introduce himself in person." Lena set down her clipboard. The pen rolled off the shelf and hit the floor, and neither of them picked it up. "Who bought us?" she asked. "DeLuca Capital," Marcus said. "Adrian DeLuca." The name hit her somewhere below the sternum, in the soft place where she used to keep things she'd trained herself not to touch. She breathed through it, kept her face even, looked at the wine racks like they were suddenly very interesting. "Okay," she said. "You know who that is?" "Everyone knows who that is." She picked up her clipboard. "Give me 10 minutes. I'll be there." She waited until Marcus closed the door before she let herself lean back against the shelving unit and press her knuckles against her mouth and stand very still for exactly 30 seconds. Then she straightened up, smoothed her blazer, and went to wash her hands. Adrian DeLuca had made the covers of Forbes, Bloomberg, and the New York Post in the same calendar year, which was a feat that required being simultaneously excellent at business and capable of making powerful people uncomfortable enough to print stories about. The financial press loved him for the returns. The gossip columns loved him because rumors followed him the way weather follows low-pressure systems, relentlessly, inevitably, with the suggestion of serious damage ahead. The other stories, the ones that ran in certain papers downtown, buried deep, sourced anonymously, were about the other side of the DeLuca name, the side his grandfather had built and his father had expanded, and that Adrian had allegedly restructured into something cleaner and more dangerous than either of them had ever managed. Lena knew all of this because she'd spent 10 years making herself know it from a safe distance, the way you monitor a hurricane on a radar screen. Present. Aware. Far enough away that it can't touch you. Except now it was standing in her dining room. She heard the voices before she reached the archway, the low collective murmur of her staff assembled. 30-odd people who trusted her to tell them things were going to be fine, even when she wasn't sure they were. She paused at the threshold and let herself look before anyone saw her. He was standing at the head of the room with his back partially turned, speaking to a man in a gray suit whose entire posture communicated legal department. Adrian was taller than she remembered, or maybe she'd just been young enough last time that she'd measured differently. His hair was darker than she would have expected for 38, cut short, no vanity in it. He wore a charcoal jacket that cost more than most of her staff made in a month, and wore it like he'd forgotten he put it on. Then he turned. Their eyes met across 40 feet of polished hardwood and 10 years of silence. Lena didn't move. Neither did he. The man in the gray suit kept talking and Adrian let him, but his attention had stopped. Everything in him had stopped, with the specific quality of stillness that belongs to people who've trained themselves not to show what they feel in rooms full of strangers. She recognized it because she'd learned it from him. She walked to her usual position, left side of the room, near the server station, and stood there with her clipboard and her flat expression and her heart doing something she hadn't given it permission to do. "Thank you all for being here," the man in the gray suit said. His name was Calloway, she'd learn later, and he was the kind of lawyer who had practiced saying things in rooms like this so many times the words had stopped meaning anything. DeLuca Capital is proud to announce the formal acquisition of Noir House, effective as of yesterday morning. Mr. DeLuca wanted to be here personally to assure the team that there are no immediate plans for structural changes. What does that mean exactly? It was Danny from the bar, and he asked it the way Danny asked everything, directly, without apology, with the specific energy of someone who'd been through ownership changes before and hadn't enjoyed them. "No immediate. Like, give us a time frame." Calloway started to answer. Adrian spoke instead. "It means I'm not here to gut the place." His voice was lower than she remembered, measured. He wasn't projecting for the room, he was just speaking, and the room happened to go quiet to accommodate it. "You have good people here. The numbers on retention and guest return rates are better than anything else I've looked at in this sector. I'd be an idiot to blow that up." A few people relaxed. Not all of them. Lena stayed where she was. "Questions will be channeled through Ms. Whitmore," Calloway continued. "She'll remain the operational point of contact for all day today." "I'd like to speak with Ms. Whitmore," Adrian said. "After this, if she's available." The room didn't quite turn to look at her, but it shifted. The atmospheric pressure of 30 people collectively not looking was its own kind of attention. "I have inventory to finish," Lena said. Silence. "Tomorrow then," Adrian said. He said it like a fact, not a question. "My office, 10 o'clock. She looked at him directly for the first time since he'd walked in. The 10 years showed up close, not in obvious ways, but in the way a face rearranges itself around the things it's carried. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. Something in his jaw had hardened that had nothing to do with age. "I'll check my calendar," she said. She left before Calloway finished the meeting. The week that followed was the strangest of Lena's professional life. And that was a high bar because she'd once managed a New Year's Eve service where the executive chef had a breakdown between the fish course and the entree, and she'd plated 47 plates of duck confit herself in 11 minutes. On Monday, she arrived to find the prep kitchen's ventilation system had been approved for full replacement, something she'd submitted a facilities request for 8 months ago and been told twice was outside the budget. The approval had come through over the weekend, signed by DeLuca Capital's operations division, allocated as a capital improvement, no cost to the restaurant's operating account. On Wednesday, she received a call from the HR benefits coordinator. Her health insurance, which had been a catastrophic coverage-only plan since the previous ownership cut costs 18 months ago, had been upgraded. Full coverage. Retroactive to the first of the month. On Thursday, she found out through Marcus that the 2 back-of-house staff members, whose positions had been listed for elimination, a decision she'd been fighting against for 3 months, had instead been reclassified as permanent, with a salary adjustment that put them above market rate. She stood in her office with that piece of paper in her hand and stared at it for a long time. None of it made sense. DeLuca Capital was an acquisition firm. They bought distressed assets, restructured them, sold at margin. Noir House was profitable, but only modestly, and the improvements being made didn't follow any restructuring logic she could identify. You didn't fix ventilation systems and upgrade employee benefits when you were planning to flip a property. You did that when you intended to stay. She called the acquisition contact at Calloway's firm and asked for the original deal documents. She was told they'd been provided to the previous ownership group. She called the previous owner, Gerald Park, who had sold the restaurant in what he described as a remarkably fast and clean transaction. They came in with an offer that was above market, Gerald said, with the vaguely dazed quality of a man who still wasn't entirely sure how it had happened. Full ask, cash, no contingencies. I figured they knew something about the market I didn't. Did they say why they wanted this specific property? Lena asked. Gerald thought about it. They said someone had flagged it as an interesting opportunity. I assumed it was the location. After she hung up, Lena sat at her desk and thought about that for a while. Then she went to her filing cabinet and pulled the folders she kept for performance reviews and cross-referenced the dates of every operational improvement request she'd submitted in the past 18 months. She laid them out on her desk. Then she laid next to them the list of improvements DeLuca Capital had already approved or implemented in the past 6 days. They matched every single one. Not the location, not the P&L projections, not the market positioning. Someone had flagged her. She was still sitting with that thought at 11:15 that night when her phone rang. Unknown number. She almost let it go to voicemail. Something made her answer. You didn't come to the meeting, Adrian said. She'd forgotten she'd told him she'd check her calendar. She also hadn't checked her calendar. I was busy, she said. Lena. The way he said her name, just her name, nothing after it, as if the syllables contained a full argument he didn't have the energy to make, did something to her chest she resented enormously. Don't, she said. I'm not doing anything. You bought my restaurant. I bought a restaurant. You happen to work there. That is a very careful way of saying something that I don't believe. Silence on the line. Not the uncomfortable kind. The kind that has weight and history in it. The kind that two people accumulate over years of knowing what the other one is doing even when neither of them speaks. I'd like to have a conversation, he said. A real one. Not in front of your staff. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? She pressed her thumb against the corner of her desk, felt the edge of it bite into her skin. Because the last time I let myself have a real conversation with you, you left without saying goodbye, and I spent 2 years wondering what I'd done wrong before I finally accepted that some people are just built to disappear. She heard him breathe. There's things you don't know, he said quietly. Then maybe you should have told me 10 years ago. She ended the call, set the phone face down on her desk, stared at the wall for a moment, at the framed photograph of the dining room on opening night, the one she'd put up because she needed a reminder every morning of what this place was before she'd made it what it was now. She was still staring at it when her phone buzzed with a text from a number she didn't recognize. One line. There are files. You should see them before you decide anything. She didn't respond. She sat there until midnight, and then she went home and lay in her apartment with the lights off and the city noise coming through the window. And she thought about all the ways you can convince yourself you've moved on from something when what you've actually done is just stopped looking directly at it. In the morning, she went back to Noir House at 6 and started the week's opening inventory and told herself she was fine. She almost believed it. It was the second week of Adrian's ownership when the real unraveling started, and it didn't begin with anything dramatic. It began with a name. Sophia Reyes was a 26-year-old line cook who'd been with Noir House for 3 years and had the kind of talent that made the executive chef simultaneously grateful and threatened. She was also, Lena had learned 2 months ago, in the early stages of a situation involving her landlord and a lease dispute that had been leaning toward eviction before it had quietly and inexplicably resolved itself last week. Lena found out about it because Sophia mentioned it in passing, with the specific casualness of someone who hadn't fully processed that it was over yet. What happened with the lease? Lena asked. Someone paid the back rent, Sophia said. She was trimming herbs and didn't look up. Anonymous, building management just said it was settled and the case was dropped. Lena kept her expression neutral. Do you know who? No. Sophia did look up then, briefly, with something uncertain in her eyes. It's a lot of money to just... I don't know. I figure I'll find out eventually. Lena went back to her office and sat down and added it to the list she'd been keeping, the list that kept growing in a direction she didn't want it to go. She found the acquisition file by accident, which was probably the only way she would have found it at all. She was too stubborn to go looking and too careful to ask questions that might give away how much she didn't know. But Marcus had CC'd her on a facilities coordination email, and the email thread had an attachment, and the attachment had been misfiled in a shared drive folder that contained what appeared to be a summary document from DeLuca Capital's initial evaluation of Noir House. She read it 3 times. The financial analysis was brief and damning. Noir House carried solid reviews and respectable reservation metrics, but its EBITDA margin was thin enough that by DeLuca Capital's standard acquisition criteria, it shouldn't have cleared the initial screening. The internal recommendation from the analysis team had been, in precise corporate language, a pass. The override was documented in a single line at the bottom of the summary, dated 6 weeks before the sale finalized, initialed AD. Proceed on strategic grounds. Personal directive. Personal directive. Lena read those 2 words until they stopped looking like words and just looked like shapes on a screen. Then she closed the file, sat back in her chair, and finally, after 2 weeks of refusing to do it, let herself understand what she'd already known. He hadn't bought Noir House because of a market opportunity or a real estate play or any of the other explanations she'd been constructing, like scaffolding around the things she didn't want to see. He'd bought it because of her. She sat with that for a long time. The city moved outside her window. The kitchen noise started up below her, the rhythmic percussion of prep work, knives and sheet pans, and someone's radio playing something she couldn't quite make out. She thought about 10 years. About the apartment she'd left in a hurry because she couldn't afford to keep paying rent somewhere that smelled like him. About the phone calls she'd stopped making because every unanswered ring felt like a verdict. About the way she'd eventually stopped being angry, not because she'd forgiven anything, but because anger requires believing the other person could have chosen differently, and she'd finally decided to just believe he couldn't. Now she was looking at a document that suggested he'd been looking for her. She didn't know what to do with that. She didn't know if it changed anything. She didn't know if the decade between then and now was something you could cross back over, or just something you carried. What she knew was that she was going to have to talk to him. She was still deciding how when the text came through, not from Adrian this time, but from Marcus. Something happened out front. You need to come now. She was halfway down the stairs before she registered that Marcus, in 7 years, had never used those words with her before. Outside, the street in front of Noir House was wrong. 2 of the front windows had taken something. She couldn't tell what, not yet, because the shatter pattern was strange, too tight, too concentrated. A delivery truck was angled half onto the curb 2 doors down, the driver out and standing in the road with his phone to his ear. 3 of her staff members were huddled just inside the lobby doors, speaking in low, urgent voices. And at the edge of the block, idling with a quiet that didn't belong on this street at this hour, were 2 black SUVs she had never seen before. What happened? She asked Marcus, who had materialized at her shoulder. Someone in a gray sedan slowed down in front of the building, Marcus said carefully, and threw something at the windows. And then the sedan left. And then those, he nodded at the SUVs, showed up about 40 seconds later. Lena looked at the SUVs for a moment, looked at the broken windows, felt something cold and specific move through her that wasn't quite fear yet, but was standing right next to it. Call the police, she said. Get everyone back from the glass. And Marcus, yeah? Don't tell anyone about the ownership meeting. Not yet. She was still standing there, watching the SUVs, when the passenger window of the nearest one lowered 3 inches and a man in a dark jacket looked at her with the flat professional attention of someone whose job was to watch for threats, and found her instead. Her phone rang. Adrian. She answered it. Go back inside, he said. No greeting. No explanation. The background on his end was engine noise and terse voices. Right now, Lena. Back inside and away from the windows. Tell me what's happening, she said. Inside first. Adrian, please. A single word stripped of everything except the thing underneath it, the thing she'd spent 10 years trying to forget existed. Please go inside. She went inside. And somewhere in the 3 minutes it took her to walk back through the lobby and up the stairs to her office. She understood that whatever version of her life she'd been living for the past 10 years, the careful version, the safe version, the version where she stayed behind her wall and counted wine inventory and pretended the past was finished with her, that version was over. She just didn't know yet what was coming instead. She stood at her office window for 11 minutes after Adrian's call ended, watching the 2 black SUVs idle at the curb below like punctuation marks at the end of a sentence she hadn't finished reading yet. The police came, took statements, photographed the broken windows. A detective named Garza, who had the specific tiredness of someone who'd filed too many reports in too many years, asked her if Noir House had received any threats recently. She told him no, which was technically true and practically meaningless. He gave her a card and told her they'd follow up, and she nodded and knew they wouldn't find anything. The SUVs were gone by the time the patrol cars left. She hadn't seen them go. Marcus came up at 7:30 with a cup of coffee she didn't ask for and set it on her desk without comment, and then stood near the door with his arms crossed, which was his version of waiting. "The kitchen crew is rattled," he said finally. "Danny's talking about looking for something else. Tell Danny his job is safe." "You sure about that?" She looked at him. Marcus had been with her for 4 years, which meant he'd been through 2 ownership changes, 1 kitchen fire, and the summer the air conditioning failed for 6 weeks during a heat advisory. He was the most dependable person she'd ever employed and the only one who asked her real questions. "No," she said. "But tell him anyway." Marcus nodded once. "The new ownership sent a facilities crew this morning. About the windows." "Already?" "Showed up an hour after the police left. Had the replacement glass measured and ordered by 8. He paused. Fast response time for a Sunday. She picked up the coffee. It was too hot, but she drank it anyway. "I know." "Lena." He waited until she looked at him. "What's actually going on?" She thought about the acquisition file, about personal directive, about Adrian's voice on the phone, stripped of its armor, saying please like the word cost him something. "I'm working on figuring that out," she said. "Give me a couple of days." He left without pushing it, which was one of the reasons she trusted him. She called the number Adrian had called from. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail that didn't have his name on it, just a tone. She didn't leave a message. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop and pulled up everything publicly available on DeLuca Capital's acquisition history for the past decade. 47 properties. Restaurants, commercial real estate, 2 mid-sized hotel chains, a shipping logistics company in New Jersey. Every acquisition had a clear financial logic behind it. Location, market positioning, asset value, turnaround potential, everyone except this one. She closed the laptop at 9:15 and went home and lay on her bed in her coat and stared at the ceiling until she fell asleep somewhere around 2 in the morning. He was at the restaurant when she arrived at 6. Not inside. He was standing on the sidewalk in front of the newly boarded windows, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the street with the specific quality of attention that didn't belong on a quiet Monday morning. He wasn't looking at his phone. He wasn't doing anything except standing there like he'd been there a while and didn't plan to leave until he'd seen what he came to see. Lena stopped 6 feet away. "You're here early." "I didn't sleep." He said it without apology or performance, just a flat statement of fact. There were shadows under his eyes that confirmed it. "You either, by the look of it." "What happened yesterday?" He glanced at her, then back at the street. "Let's go inside." "Tell me out here." "Lena, out here," she said. "I'm not walking into a private room with you until you tell me something true." He turned and looked at her directly for the first time that morning. The daylight was ungenerous. It showed everything the boardroom lighting had softened. The lines in his face, the set of his jaw, the way his eyes had that quality of someone who'd learned to expect the worst from most situations and had been right often enough to stop being surprised by it. "The men in the sedan," he said. "They work for a family called Tyrone. Carmine Tyrone. He operates out of Brighton Beach, and he's been trying to establish a position in Manhattan for 3 years. He and I have history." "What kind of history?" "The kind that involves him wanting what I have and not being particular about how he gets it." She pulled her coat tighter. The morning was cold and the wind off the river had teeth. "And yesterday was what? A message?" "A test. To see if I'd respond." He paused. "To see what I'd move to protect." She understood what that meant before he finished saying it. She felt the understanding land in her chest like a stone dropped in still water, the ripples going outward, slow and inevitable. "So they already know," she said, "that you bought this place, that I'm here. They knew before I did." Something shifted in his face, a tightening around his eyes. "I got intelligence on it 2 days after the acquisition closed. Tyrone has someone inside my operation. I don't know who yet, but whoever it is flagged the purchase and flagged your connection to me within 72 hours. The cold wasn't just the wind anymore. Connection to you. We haven't spoken in 10 years. That doesn't change what you are to me. He said it without inflection, like it was geography. They know I haven't been in contact with you. They also know I bought a restaurant that had no business making it through my acquisition criteria. They're not stupid people, Lena. They can do the math. She stood with that for a moment. The street was starting to come alive around them. A delivery truck, a woman walking a dog, the distant noise of the garbage collection 2 blocks over. Normal city morning. She felt very far away from it. You're telling me I'm a liability to you, she said. I'm telling you that you're in a situation you didn't create and don't deserve, and I'm the reason for it, and I'm going to fix it. How? I need you to trust me. She laughed. It came out shorter and sharper than she intended, but she didn't take it back. You need me to trust you. Adrian DeLuca, who I haven't heard from in 10 years, who purchased my place of employment without telling me, who is apparently involved in some kind of ongoing conflict with organized crime that has now broken my windows. You need my trust. Yes. That is an extraordinary ask. I know. He met her eyes steadily. I know exactly what I'm asking. The wind came off the river again. She pressed her teeth together against the cold and thought about the acquisition file, about personal directive, about Sophia's back rent and her ventilation system and the 2 line cooks who'd kept their jobs. Come inside, she said. I'll make coffee, and you're going to talk. He followed her in. The conversation happened in her office, which was not big enough for the weight of what they were putting in it. Adrian sat in the chair across from her desk, which made him look almost like any other person she'd dealt with in a professional capacity, except that no other person she'd dealt with professionally had ever made the air in the room feel different just by being in it. She put coffee in front of him and sat down and said, Start at the beginning, the real beginning, not the public version. He was quiet for a moment, not performing reluctance, genuinely organizing something that had a lot of pieces. My father, he said, when I left 10 years ago, it wasn't a choice I made, not the way you understood it. You were there on a Thursday, she said. You were gone Friday morning. No call, no note, nothing. I know. I called you 47 times over 2 weeks. She'd counted. She'd hated herself for counting, and she'd counted anyway. I called your brother. I called your mother's house. I drove to the apartment on West 82nd, and the locks had been changed. Something passed through his face at that, quick and controlled, but she saw it. I know. I was told you'd been informed it was over. By who? Someone my father paid to tell you. He looked at his coffee. My father found out about us 3 weeks before I disappeared. He considered it a complication. You were a civilian. You had no connections, no leverage, no understanding of what the family was involved in. To him, that made you dangerous. Not because of anything you'd do intentionally, but because of what could happen to you if the wrong people found out you mattered to me. Lena's hands were very still on the desk. What did he do? Adrian looked up. He gave me a choice. End it, visibly, completely, in a way that convinced every associate and every rival that you were nothing to me, or he would make you disappear permanently so that there was nothing to threaten. The room was quiet. Below them, the kitchen was starting up, the first sounds of prep work. She could hear Danny's voice, something about the cooler temperature. He would have killed me, she said. Yes, and you believe that. I watched him make that same calculation about 2 other people before I was 25. His voice didn't change. That was somehow the worst part of it. He didn't threaten. He calculated. He'd already decided. The only variable was what I did next. She breathed in slowly, let it out. So you left. So I left. I let you believe what you needed to believe. And I put 2 men on you for the next 18 months to make sure nobody from my father's world came near you. He paused. And then I went back to New York, and I became what my father needed me to be, because as long as I was useful to him, he left you alone. Lena sat back in her chair. She was aware of her own heartbeat in a way she normally wasn't. The investigators, she said, you said you'd been looking. From the day I left. There was no drama in how he said it. The protection detail lost track of you when you moved from Philadelphia. I'd given them instructions to watch, but not to interfere with your life. I didn't want them near enough that you'd notice them or feel followed. When you moved, they missed the window. Something crossed his face. It took me 11 months to accept that I didn't know where you were. And then another 8 years of looking. 8 years. I hired 4 different firms, followed leads to Atlanta, to Portland, to a woman in Denver who turned out to have the same name and roughly the same age. He said it evenly, but there was something under it, something compressed. Someone in my position has access to resources most people don't. I used all of them for 8 years. She thought about all the nights she'd spent in cities that weren't home, building something from nothing, telling herself she was free, telling herself she was better off. All those carefully constructed mornings, counting wine inventory and managing staff schedules, and deciding that this was enough, this was good, this was a life. And then someone saw me, she said, a journalist, did a piece on New York's restaurant culture. He'd been living in Chicago, came back, did a dining circuit, photographed the front of house at Noir House for a background shot, published it in a trade piece 6 months ago. The muscle in his jaw moved. One of my people was doing a routine media sweep, saw your face, called me. 6 months ago. The acquisition took 4 months to negotiate and close. Gerald Park is deliberate. She almost laughed again, but it didn't come out this time. You spent 4 months buying a restaurant to find me. I spent 4 months making sure I could get to you without anyone in my world knowing why. Because if they knew why, the same problem my father had 10 years ago becomes the same problem again. He looked at her directly. Except that my father is dead. And the man who currently has the most reason to use you against me is Carmine Tyrone, who found out anyway. She pressed 2 fingers to her temple. Because of the leak inside your operation. Yes. Which you haven't identified. Not yet. She looked at him across her desk, this man who had been the shape of a wound in her for 10 years, and tried to reconcile the story she'd constructed with the one he was telling her. The two didn't fit cleanly. They never did. People's real stories almost never mapped onto the ones you built around their absence. I need time to think, she said. I know. I'm not asking you for anything except I need you to stop doing things for me, she said. The benefits. Sophia's rent, the ventilation system. Stop making decisions about my life without asking me. He was quiet for a moment. Those weren't about controlling your life. I know what they were about, and I'm telling you to stop. She held his gaze. I'm not a problem you get to solve from a distance, Adrian. I'm not a project. If you want to have a conversation about what this is, whatever this is, then we're going to have it like 2 people who are both standing up, not like someone in a tower and someone who doesn't know they're being watched. The muscle in his jaw moved again. Fair. That's the first condition. What's the second? Tell me who you think the leak is. Something shifted in his face, sharp and quick. Why? Because I run a restaurant with 31 employees and at least one of them came to your attention through an anonymous tip, and I want to know if you think the vulnerability is inside my house. He looked at her for a long moment. It's not your staff. The intelligence that reached Tyrone was operational. Acquisition timelines, security rotations, that's not something your people would have access to. But you're not certain. I'm rarely certain about anything. I operate on probability. How probable is it that those men come back? He didn't answer immediately, and his not answering immediately was its own answer. Adrian, hi, he said. If Tyrone believes you're significant to me, and the window was a test, which means he's in the process of confirming what he suspects, then yes, high probability. Lena looked at the photograph on her wall. Opening night, the dining room full of light. So what do you propose? She asked. Let me put security on the building. Discreet. Your staff won't notice the increase. And me? He met her eyes. I'd like you somewhere safer while I work the problem on my end. The estate in Westchester. No. Immediate. No hesitation. Lena, I am not disappearing into one of your safe houses while you work the problem. She felt the edge in her own voice and didn't soften it. That is not a compromise I'm willing to make. This is my restaurant. These are my people. I am not running. He breathed out slowly, something that wasn't quite frustration but lived in the same neighborhood. You're difficult. I'm consistent. There's a difference. She stood. Security on the building? Fine. I want to know who they are and how to reach them. Anything that happens to Noir House or my staff, I hear about directly. Not through Marcus, not through Calloway. Me. She extended her hand across the desk. Agreed? He looked at her hand, looked at her face. Something moved through his expression that she couldn't fully name. Too many things at once, too compressed. He stood and took her hand. His grip was steady and warm, and she let go of it too quickly and pretended not to notice that she had. The next 4 days were almost normal, which was worse in a way than things being obviously wrong. Normal gave her space to think. Thinking meant replaying the conversation in her office until she'd worn grooves in it, examining every piece of what he'd told her for the place where it might not hold, where the story might develop cracks that would show her something different underneath. She didn't find any. That was its own kind of unsettling. She ran the restaurant. She did her inventory and managed her staff and handled a Thursday dinner service that was 2 reservations short of capacity, which was fine. She kept her eyes on the dining room the way she always did, and she noticed the 2 men in the bar area who nursed single drinks for the entire service and watched the door and were definitely not there for the food. And she didn't say anything about it because she'd agreed to security, and those were security. She also noticed, on Wednesday evening, the gray sedan. It was different from the one Marcus had described. This one was older, a domestic make, parked across the street and down half a block. It was there when she arrived at 6:20, and it was still there when she left at 11:40. She wrote down the plate number. She didn't call Adrian, not that night, because she was still deciding what she was and wasn't going to need from him, and calling him because she was frightened felt like a concession she wasn't ready to make. She called him Thursday morning. The plate is registered to a shell company in Queens, he said, with the flat speed of someone who'd already run the check. I know about the car. You've been watching the block. Yes. I appreciate the warning, she said, and didn't bother keeping the dryness out of her voice. I was going to tell you tonight. I wanted to confirm the connection first. And? It connects to Tyrone's operation through 2 intermediaries. They're running surveillance, which means they've moved past testing, she said. She was standing in the dry storage room again, the same place she'd been when Marcus told her about the ownership change, 2 weeks and a lifetime ago. They're planning something. Yes. She pressed the back of her hand against the cold metal of the wine rack, let the chill run up her arm. How long do I have? I don't know. I'm working on the leak. If I can find who's feeding them information, I can cut off their visibility into my movements. That limits their ability to plan anything coordinated. And if you don't find the leak first? He was quiet for a moment. Then we manage it as it comes. That's a terrible answer. It's an honest one. She pulled her hand away from the rack. Your accountant, she said. What? Your financial advisor. The one who handles the DeLuca Capital accounts. She'd been turning it over since Wednesday morning when she'd been going through the operational expenses and noticed an anomaly in the facility's billing, an invoice that had been processed through an account number she didn't recognize, then corrected an hour later by someone with administrative access. It was the kind of error that happened when someone was using a system for 2 different purposes at the same time. What's his name? Silence on the line, long enough to mean something. Why? Adrian asked. I was going through the facility's billing for the window repair. There was an account routing error that got corrected manually. Administrative access, your systems, corrected at 11:15 on a Sunday night. She waited. Who has that level of access on a Sunday night? Another silence. Different quality this time. The kind of silence that happens when someone is very quickly reorganizing information they thought they understood. Vincent Rao, Adrian said finally. He's been my primary financial advisor for 6 years. How much does he know about the acquisition? Everything. His voice had gone flat and careful. Everything about the acquisition. About you. About the security rotations. A pause. About the fact that I was closing in on the source of the leak. She heard it before he said it, heard the shape of it coming. He's the leak, she said. I need to verify. Adrian. She kept her voice level. If he knows you're closing in on the source, and he's the source, then right now he's making a phone call. The silence lasted exactly 2 seconds. Get out of the building, Adrian said. Right now. Don't stop for anything. Go out the service exit on the south side, and she was already moving. She made it through the kitchen at a pace that wasn't quite running, but was close enough that Marcus called after her. She didn't stop, just said, get everyone away from the windows without looking back, and pushed through the service door and into the alley behind the building. The alley was empty. The evening air hit her hard after the kitchen warmth. She moved fast toward the south end, phone pressed to her ear, Adrian's voice saying, keep moving, keep talking to me. There's a car coming to you. She heard the other car first. Not the SUVs. Something else. Engine too loud for the narrow alley, moving too fast, coming from the north end where there shouldn't have been a car at all because the alley gate was kept locked. The gate that was standing open. She ran. The headlights hit the alley walls from behind her, and the distance between the lights and her back was closing, and she turned a hard left through the gap between 2 dumpsters just as the vehicle came through, and she pressed herself flat against the brick and held her breath and heard it accelerate past, and then the screaming tires from the street ahead. 3 vehicles, not one. She heard the doors before she saw them, heard boots on pavement, heard Adrian's voice on her phone saying something in a language that wasn't English. And then there were running footsteps coming toward her from the street, end of the alley, and she pulled back further into the dark gap between the dumpsters and had exactly 1 second to decide whether to run or freeze. A hand closed around her arm. She spun, elbow up, connected with something solid, heard a grunt. It's me. The voice was rough and low. A man she didn't recognize. Early 40s, dark jacket, the specific economy of movement that belonged to people who operated in dangerous spaces. Mr. DeLuca sent me. Come with me right now. She looked at him, at his face, at his hands, at the way he was positioned between her and the alley entrance. Then she heard the sound from the north end of the alley. Not the car, something else, closer and worse. She went with him. They moved fast through the south exit and into a waiting SUV, and she was inside and the door was closing and the vehicle was already accelerating before she'd fully processed that she was in it. Her breath was coming short. She could feel her pulse in her ears, in her fingers, in the side of her neck. She looked at her phone. The call was still connected. I'm in the car, she said. I know. His voice was tight. She could hear engine noise on his end now, too. I'm coming to you. Don't hang up. Where are we going? Somewhere safe. That's not an answer? I know. Don't hang up. The SUV pulled onto a main street and merged with traffic, and the driver said nothing, and she watched the city move past the windows and thought about her restaurant, about 31 people who were inside it right now, about Marcus telling everyone to step away from the windows without knowing why. My staff, she said, already on it. I've got people inside. You had people inside my restaurant. Yes. She breathed. The city kept moving. We're going to talk about the things you haven't told me. Yes. All of them. Yes, Lena. Something in his voice that she hadn't heard yet, cracked at the edge in a way that years of control had almost but not entirely smoothed over. All of them, I promise. The SUV crossed the bridge, heading north, the lights of the city falling away behind them, and Lena pressed her palm flat against the cold window and thought about the 2 versions of the past 10 years she'd been carrying, the one she'd built from silence and the one that had apparently been built around her without her knowledge, and understood, with the specific clarity that comes from being frightened, that she was about to find out which one was true. The estate sat back from the river road behind a gate that opened without anyone touching it, which meant someone had already called ahead. Which meant Adrian had people here the same way he had people everywhere, quietly, efficiently, without advertising the fact. Lena watched the gate close behind the SUV in the side mirror and said nothing. The house was large in the way that old money is large, not ostentatious, just permanent, built from stone that had been here longer than anyone currently alive had been making decisions. The kind of structure that assumed it would outlast whoever occupied it. Floodlights caught the gravel drive and the dark shapes of trees and the flat black surface of the Hudson visible through the gaps between them. The driver parked and got out and opened her door without speaking. She stepped onto the gravel and the cold hit her properly for the first time. She'd left without her coat, still in her service blazer, and the wind off the water was serious about it. Adrian's car came through the gate 40 seconds after hers. She watched him get out. He moved fast, scanning the tree line before he looked at her, which told her something about the order of his priorities in the first 3 seconds after arriving somewhere. Then he looked at her and crossed the gravel in 8 steps and stopped close enough that she could see his breath in the cold air. "You're all right," he said. It wasn't a question, but it had the quality of one. "I'm cold and I'm angry," she said, "but not hurt." Something in his face loosened by a degree. He shrugged off his jacket and held it out, and she stared at it for a moment and then took it because she was genuinely cold. And this was not the moment to make a point about it. "Inside," he said. The house was warm and lit with the careful restraint of a place that had been prepared without knowing exactly what it was being prepared for. A woman in her 60s who introduced herself only as Mrs. Farrow showed Lena to a room with a bathroom and a change of clothes that were roughly her size. Not perfectly, but close enough to confirm that someone had made a reasonable guess. And Lena stood in the bathroom for 4 minutes with the door locked and her hands braced on the sink and let herself be frightened for exactly that long. Then she washed her face with cold water and changed and went back downstairs. Adrian was in a room off the main hall that was trying to be a study and mostly succeeding. He was on the phone when she came in, speaking in the flat, clipped cadences of someone issuing instructions, and he held up one finger without looking at her, and she sat in the chair across from the fireplace and waited and watched his face while he talked. The call ended. He set the phone down on the desk and turned. "My staff," she said. "Everyone's accounted for. Marcus got them into the back of the house when the vehicles came around the block. Nobody was in the front windows." He moved to the chair across from her but didn't sit. Stood with one hand on the back of it. "Tyrone sent 4 men. My security team intercepted them before they reached the building. It's handled. Handled. Detained and transported. The police will find them in approximately 6 hours with enough documentation to connect them to Tyrone's operation directly." His voice was even, professional. "It buys us time." "How much time?" "Enough." He pulled out the chair and sat, put his forearms on his knees and looked at her directly. "I need to deal with Rao tonight. I have a team moving on his location now. Once I have him, I want to be there," she said. He stopped. "When you talk to him," Lena said, "I want to be in the room." "That's not—" "You said all of them. All the things you haven't told me." She held his gaze. "You made a promise 40 minutes ago in a car. I'm collecting on it." He studied her for a moment. "It won't be a pleasant conversation." "I didn't think it would be." Something moved across his face. Not quite respect, or not only respect. Something more complicated than that, with more history in it. "Okay," he said. They waited. The call came at 12:47. Rao was at his apartment on the Upper East Side. Adrian's team had him. They were bringing him here. The drive back into the city took 40 minutes, and neither of them spoke much for most of it. At some point, she became aware that her hands were cold, and she pressed them together in her lap, and Adrian noticed, in the peripheral way he seemed to notice everything, and turned the heat up without being asked. Small gesture. She filed it away with the other ones. Vincent Rao was 51 years old and had the kind of face that had probably been trustworthy for most of his life. Soft around the jaw, unremarkable eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, the comfortable build of someone who ate well and worried about other people's money for a living. He was sitting at the table in a room on the estate's ground floor when they brought Lena in, his wrists zip-tied loosely in front of him, and he looked at her with an expression she couldn't immediately categorize. Not frightened, not defiant, something else, almost relieved. That was the first wrong thing. Adrian came in behind her and closed the door. One of his men, the same one from the alley, she recognized the economy of movement, stood near the wall and said nothing. "Vincent," Adrian said. Rao looked at him. "I expected this 2 days ago," he said. His voice was steady, conversational, like they were having a scheduling discussion. "When you started pulling the routing records." "Then you understand why you're here." "I do." Rao glanced at Lena, then back to Adrian. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't me. It was. I've been providing operational information to Carmine Tyrone's people for approximately 14 months. Lena watched Adrian's hands. They didn't move. His face didn't change. But she'd spent the last 3 days studying his tells, and she saw the way the muscle in his right forearm went tight against the cuff of his shirt. 14 months, Adrian said. Yes. The Reinhold deal. Yes. The Marist acquisition. Yes. The security rotation changes, the acquisition of Noir House. A pause. The fact that Lena Whitmore was here, that she was significant. Rao's jaw shifted. Something moved through his expression that was the closest thing to discomfort he'd shown. Yes. Lena's voice came out flat and cold and surprised her with both qualities. Why? Rao looked at her again. This time he didn't look away. Because Tyrone had information I needed him not to use, he said. About a transaction 12 years ago. Something I did before I came to work for Adrian's organization. He pushed his glasses up with 2 zip-tied hands, the gesture so ordinary it was almost absurd. I've been paying a debt I can't get out from under. Every piece of intelligence I gave him reduced what I owed, except the debt never actually reduced. That's how these things work eventually. You traded her safety to cover your exposure, Adrian said. I traded operational information. I didn't know how far he'd take it. You knew he'd take it somewhere. Adrian's voice hadn't changed in pitch or pace, but it had the quality of something very still before it moves. You've been doing this for 14 months. You watched him test the situation. You saw what he sent to the restaurant 2 weeks ago. Rao was quiet. You saw what happened tonight, Adrian said. You made a call that put her in an alley with 4 of Tyrone's people coming around the block. I made a call I couldn't not make. For the first time, Rao's voice changed. Not loud, not dramatic, just stripped of the professional steadiness, down to something raw under it. I have a family, Adrian. I have a wife and 2 daughters, and Tyrone had information that would have ended everything. Everything. And you, he stopped, pressed his bound hands against the table. You of all people understand what it means to make a choice to protect the people you don't. Adrian's voice landed like a door closing. Don't finish that. Rao finished it anyway. The people you love. The room was very quiet. Lena looked at the table's surface, at the grain of the wood, at Rao's hands resting there, still. She was thinking about 14 months, about the gray sedan, about Sophia's rent being paid and the window crew showing up an hour after the police left and all those careful, invisible gestures that had been meant to protect her, and how, running underneath all of them, there had been this. A pipe open the whole time. Everything Adrian had moved to keep her safe, and the man who knew all of it had been feeding her coordinates to the people who wanted to use her. What does Tyrone know? She asked. Specifically, about me. What has he been told? Rao looked at her. Your full name, your position at Noir House, your prior relationship with Adrian, and the approximate timeline. He paused. Your apartment address. She kept her face still. My apartment address. As of 3 weeks ago, before tonight's operation, he had it. Whether he's acted on that separately from tonight, I don't know. She looked at Adrian. He was already looking at her. Already calculating something, she could see it. The specific quality of attention he got when he was moving pieces on a board she couldn't fully see. My things, she said. We'll handle it. There are things in that apartment that we'll get them. His voice was careful and certain, and she understood that careful, certain voice cost him something to maintain right now. Nobody's going near your apartment without my people there first. That's already in motion. She nodded, looked back at Rao. Is there anything else? She asked him. Anything you told them that I don't know yet? Rao held her gaze. He was, she thought, not a bad man. She believed him about the family, about the impossible position, about the debt that never actually reduced. Bad men didn't tend to look the way he looked right now, and like someone watching the full weight of what they'd done arrive in the room, too late to do anything about where it had already landed. There's a meeting, he said. Tyrone's operation. He's been consolidating. 4 other families, smaller but connected, have been in conversation about a coordinated move against DeLuca Capital's Manhattan interests. The goal is to reduce your operational footprint enough that you can't, he glanced at Adrian, can't hold what you currently hold. The acquisition of Noir House was the trigger. It proved to them that you'd moved to consolidate something personal, which they read as a vulnerability. He paused. Ms. Whitmore is not a secondary target. She is the primary leverage point in the entire coordinated strategy. Lena heard that land, felt it land in the specific way that your body processes information that your brain is still a few seconds behind on. The dining room, the staff, Sophia trimming herbs and Marcus with his crossed arms, and Danny at the bar talking about whether to stay. All of it, because of her. When is the meeting? Adrian asked. Rao hesitated. Vincent. Adrian's voice was not loud and not warm. When? It's not a future meeting, Rao said. It happened 2 days ago. The coordinated operation was approved. They're already past planning. His eyes moved briefly to Lena and then back. The target is a high-visibility event. Something that sends a message to the city's entire financial and political community that DeLuca Capital can be hit. They want witnesses. He stopped. The Noir House reopening charity gala. The silence that followed had a specific texture to it. Dense. Like pressure. Lena heard her own voice come out very level. That event is in 4 days. I know. There are over 200 confirmed guests, politicians, business owners, federal officials. I know. She looked at Adrian. His jaw was set and his eyes had gone to the specific flat quality she'd been learning to recognize, the place where he went when he was operating rather than feeling. She recognized it differently now than she had 2 hours ago. Now she understood it as a kind of load-bearing structure, the thing that held everything else up when everything else was under pressure. We cancel the gala, she said. That tells them we know, Adrian said, which burns any tactical advantage we have and confirms to every family Tyrone's brought on board that we're operating defensively. I don't care about tactical advantage. If we cancel, they move the operation somewhere we haven't accounted for, something we can't control the environment on. He was watching her carefully. The gala is a known quantity. My security has designed coverage for that building. I have people on the guest list and in the catering staff and at every access point. If they hit us there, we're as prepared as we're going to be anywhere. She stared at him. You're telling me you want to use the gala as bait? I'm telling you that moving the fight to our strongest position is better than letting them choose the position. Those are my guests. Those are people who came because I invited them, because Noir House... She stopped, breathed. If something goes wrong, if anyone in that room gets hurt, nothing is going to happen to anyone in that room that I can stop. That is an enormous hedge, Adrian. I know. He said it quietly, without the professional evenness, just under it. I know it is. She looked at Rao, who had watched this exchange with the expression of a man who knew his part in the conversation was finished and was now simply present for what came after. Get him out of here, she said. Adrian gestured. The man near the wall moved. Rao stood without being told to, which said something about his own sense of what was appropriate at this point, and walked out with one hand on his arm and the door closed behind them. Lena stood up. She moved to the window. Estate grounds at 2 a.m, floodlights and dark trees, and the sense of open space that was almost more disorienting than enclosed space would have been right now. She pressed one hand against the cold glass. Say it, Adrian said from behind her. Not a command, just permission. I did everything right, she said. Her voice came out steady, which surprised her. I left. I rebuilt. I made something from nothing in a city that didn't know my name, and I was careful, and I worked, and I didn't... She stopped. Started again. I didn't look for trouble. I didn't ask for any of this. I kept my head down and I made a quiet life, and it found me anyway. Yes, he said, quietly. It did. Because of you. A beat. Yes. She turned around. He was standing near the desk, still, hands loose at his sides, watching her with an expression she was finally able to name. Not guilt exactly, because guilt was too simple for what was in his face. Guilt was what you felt about a specific act. What he was carrying was the accumulated weight of a decade of choices made from impossible positions, and all of them had led here. And he knew it, and he wasn't going to argue the point. "You should have let me choose," she said, 10 years ago. "You should have told me what your father said, and you should have let me decide what risk I was willing to carry. You were 26. I was an adult. And he would have killed you within the month. Maybe," she held his gaze, "or maybe we would have figured something out together instead of spending a decade on opposite sides of a silence that neither of us built on purpose." He didn't answer that, because there was no answer that didn't concede the point, and he wasn't the kind of man who conceded points he hadn't already given up privately. "I can't fix the 10 years, he said finally. "No, I can fix this." "Can you?" She looked at him. 4 families. A coordinated operation. A gala in 4 days with 200 people in it. She shook her head slightly. "What does fixing this even look like from where you're standing?" "It looks like finding the traitor inside the operation before the gala," he said, "which we've done. It looks like cutting the intelligence feed so Tyrone is running blind into an environment my security controls. It looks like having enough documented financial crime evidence to dismantle his operation legally through federal channels, which I've been building for 14 months. Ironically, through some of the same records Rao was using to cover his tracks." She stared at him. "You've been building a federal case." "I've been building leverage, several kinds simultaneously." He said it without drama. "I learned from my father that power maintained only through violence is exhausting and finite. I've been working on a different model." She thought about that, about the man she'd known at 26, who had been smart and driven and reckless in the specific way of someone who hadn't yet discovered their own limits. And about this man, standing in this room at 2 a.m, who had apparently spent a decade building something out of the ruins of what his family had made. And whether that changed what any of it had cost, and whether that was a question with a clean answer. "The gala," she said. "Yes. If I agree to this, if I agree to run it, to not cancel, to let your people do what they need to do, I need to know exactly what that means. Not the version where you tell me what I need to hear, the real version. It means the event proceeds as planned. It means my security team has full access to the building for the 48 hours before. It means there are people in that room who are not guests." He paused. "And it means that when Tyrone's people move, we're ready. And the response is going to be visible, and it's going to be final. And me. I need you in the building, as the face of Noir House. If you disappear from the event, Tyrone knows something changed. So I'm bait. You're the reason the plan holds together." He crossed the room slowly and stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could see the texture of the tiredness in his face. "That's different from bait. Bait is passive. You'd know everything. You'd be the one who sees what I can't see from the security position. You know every face in that room that belongs there, which means you'd be the one who identifies what doesn't." She looked at him for a long moment. "There's something else," she said. "Something you haven't told me yet. I can see you holding it." His jaw tightened. He looked at the floor for a moment, then back at her, and what was in his face when he made that choice to look back was the thing she'd been waiting for since the office. Since the alley, since the car, the place where the control finally costs more to maintain than to release. "Rao wasn't the only leak," he said. She went very still. "He was the primary source. But Tyrone's operation has a second channel into my organization. Someone who didn't know about Rao, or who did know and was operating in parallel." He exhaled slowly. "Someone closer." "How close?" He didn't answer immediately. "Adrian? How close?" "The gala guest list," he said. "There are 4 names on it that I added personally. People I trust implicitly. People who know not just that the gala is happening, but what I've been building toward. The federal documentation, the security plan, the fact that I intended to use the event as a controlled environment." He stopped. Tyrone knew details about the security design that Rao didn't have access to, which means the second channel is one of those 4 people. She felt the cold move through her that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. "Who are they?" He told her. She listened to 4 names, and 3 of them she'd never heard before, and the 4th one she had heard recently in a context that made the ground shift under everything she thought she'd understood about the past 2 weeks. And she stood in that room at 2 in the morning and felt the full weight of it come down. She stood there and let it be true for a moment because that was the only thing she could do with it. Just let it sit in the room and take up space and be real before she tried to do anything about the fact that it was real. Marcus. 4 years. Every difficult conversation, every ownership change, every service where something had gone wrong and he'd been the one standing in the door of her office with crossed arms and flat eyes, and the specific reliable stillness of someone she had trusted without examining the trust because it had never given her a reason to. "How certain are you?" she said. Her voice came out strange, too even, the kind of even that happens when you are keeping something under significant pressure. "The security design leak," Adrian said. He wasn't looking away from her face. He was watching her the way you watch someone who might need catching. The specific details Tyrone had, the access points, the timing rotations, the catering staff positions. That's operational security design that Rao didn't have. The only people who had the full document were the 4 names on the list. A pause. Marcus Hale has been employed at Noir House for 4 years. He was recruited by the previous ownership group. I had my team run his full background when the acquisition closed. And? Clean surface. But there's a 3-month gap in his employment history 6 years ago that roots back through 2 intermediaries to a logistics operation connected to Tyrone's organization. He said it quietly, not gently. He wasn't the kind of man who confused quiet with gentle, just steady. I don't think he came to Noir House because of you specifically. I think he was there when I bought it and Tyrone saw the opportunity and activated him. She pressed her thumbnail hard against the edge of her opposite palm, felt the small, sharp line of pressure, focused on it. He got everyone away from the windows tonight, she said. Yes. When the vehicles came around the block, he told everyone to move to the back of house. Yes. So he protected the staff. He protected the staff, Adrian said carefully, while also being the reason the vehicles knew exactly which block to come around and at what time. She breathed. The fireplace across the room was making the only sound in the space, the low, steady sound of something burning down to its last hour. "What do you need me to do?" she said. "Nothing tonight. Tonight you sleep. Tomorrow." "What do you need me to do?" she said again, in the same tone, which was not a tone that was going to accept nothing tonight as an answer. He looked at her for a long moment. "Tomorrow I need you to go back to Noir House and act like nothing has changed. I need Marcus in his regular position for the next 4 days. If he knows we've identified him, he runs, Tyrone gets the warning, and whatever they're planning for the gala accelerates or relocates. You want me to work next to him for 4 days?" "Yes." She looked at the floor, at the pattern in the rug, which was old and probably expensive and was currently just a thing she was looking at while she decided whether she was capable of what he was asking. She thought about Marcus setting a cup of coffee on her desk without being asked. Marcus saying what's actually going on with the specific directness of someone who had learned exactly how much she'd tell him and asked right up to that line every time. 4 years of that. And underneath it, this. "Okay," she said. She slept for 4 hours in a room that smelled like cedar and cold river air and woke at 6 with the specific clarity of someone whose body has decided that additional sleep is less urgent than the situation at hand. She showered and dressed in her own clothes, which had been retrieved from her apartment overnight, along with everything that mattered, packed into 3 bags that were waiting outside her door. She didn't ask how they'd gotten in. She understood now that there were layers of operation around her that she'd been living inside without knowing it, and knowing about them now didn't make them less strange, just more visible. Adrian was already awake. She found him in the kitchen, which was not where she'd expected to find him. She'd expected the study, the phone calls, the controlled professional atmosphere of a man managing a crisis. Instead, he was at the counter with a coffee maker that looked older than the rest of the kitchen and a mug that said something she couldn't read from across the room, and he was reading something on his phone with the specific stillness of someone who'd been up for a while. He looked up when she came in. "Coffee," he said. "Please." He poured it without ceremony and set it in front of her. And she drank it standing at the counter, and for 30 seconds, neither of them said anything. and it was the least complicated 30 seconds she'd had in days. "Federal contact," he said then. "Agent Diane Marsh. She's been working the Tyrone file for 2 years. I've been providing documentation to her team through a sealed channel." He set his phone down. "She knows about the gala. She'll have people in the building." "Does she know about the second leak?" "She will in an hour. She can't move on it before the gala without tipping Tyrone, so the information stays contained." He picked up his mug. "She knows I've been building toward this. She's not happy about the method, but she understands the objective." "What is the objective? Exactly?" "Tyrone in federal custody. The Allied family is compromised enough that the coordination collapses. The financial documentation goes public through the federal case, which dismantles the operational funding for all 5 families simultaneously." He paused. "And you not being a target anymore?" She looked at him over her coffee. "That last one isn't a federal objective." "No," he said. "It's mine." She put her mug down. "I'm going in, to Noir House. I want to be there before the kitchen crew arrives." "I'll have a car. I'll take a cab." She held up one hand before he could object. "If I arrive in an armored SUV, Marcus notices. I need to look like Tuesday morning." She looked at him steadily. "I know what I'm doing." He studied her for a moment, then nodded once. "I'll be reachable. Every hour on the hour you send me a single text. 1 word. Anything. Just so I know." She thought about arguing with that and decided it wasn't the hill. "Fine." She picked up her bag. At the kitchen doorway, she stopped and looked back at him, this man standing in an old kitchen with an old coffee maker, and thought about all the versions of this moment she might have had over the past 10 years if things had gone differently, all the ordinary mornings that had been stolen by a decision he'd made to protect her from a threat she hadn't known existed. She didn't say any of that. There wasn't language for it yet that wouldn't come out wrong. 1 word, she said. "Every hour." "Every hour," he said. She left. The 4 days that followed were the longest of her life, and she had a high bar for that too. She worked. She did what she always did: inventory, staff management, vendor calls, the 1,000 operational details that kept a restaurant functioning at the level Noir House required. She stood in the kitchen during prep and talked to Sophia about the menu for the gala and didn't think about the fact that there were people in the catering lists who were not there for the food. She handled a supplier dispute on Wednesday morning with the flat efficiency she brought to every supplier dispute. She attended a pre-event walkthrough with the event coordinator on Thursday afternoon and walked every inch of the dining room and the private event space and the service corridors and noted, without commenting on, the subtle differences in the building's access point security that had appeared since the previous week. And every morning, every afternoon, every evening, she stood within 10 feet of Marcus Hale and managed to look like nothing in the world had changed. It was the hardest thing she'd ever done. Harder than rebuilding after Philadelphia, harder than the first winter in a city where she hadn't known anyone, harder than every night she'd spent deciding to stop waiting for a call that wasn't coming. Because those things had required endurance. This required performance. Performance at a level that couldn't slip once in front of someone who had spent 4 years learning to read her. Marcus was good at his job. That was the part she kept landing on, the part that made it most difficult. He was genuinely good, attentive to the staff, precise about operations, exactly the person she had always believed him to be in every professional dimension. Whatever he was doing for Tyrone, it hadn't made him a bad manager, and somehow that was worse than if it had. She would have caught a bad manager. She'd caught every bad one she'd ever hired within 60 days because bad management has tells. Loyalty corruption apparently had different tells, and she'd missed them for 4 years, and that was its own education. She sent Adrian 1-word texts every hour on the hour. Stable, fine, clear, running, solid. She varied them enough that they didn't look like a pattern, but kept them short enough that anyone who glanced at her phone would see nothing informative. He responded to each one within 3 minutes, which told her he was watching for them, which told her something she didn't let herself think about too directly while she was trying to maintain the performance. On Thursday night, the night before the gala, she worked until 11 and then sat in her office alone for 20 minutes and allowed herself to feel the full weight of what tomorrow was. 214 confirmed guests, politicians, finance people, community organizers, 4 federal agents she knew about, and probably others she didn't. Her dining room, her kitchen, her staff. The building she'd poured 7 years into turned into a controlled environment for a confrontation she hadn't asked for and couldn't step out of now. She picked up her phone, didn't text one word, called. He answered on the first ring. "I know," he said. Before she'd said anything, just, "I know." "Tell me it's going to work," she said. A beat. Long enough that she knew he was deciding whether to give her the reassurance or the truth. He gave her the truth. "I think it's going to work. I can't promise it will. There are variables I don't control." A pause. "But the variables I do control are as locked as I can make them. Marcus is being handled tomorrow. He'll be in the building until the moment it matters, and then my people will move him out of play before he can communicate anything to Tyrone. He'll know. When that happens, he'll know we knew." Yes, that's acceptable by that point. She pressed the heel of her hand against her eye socket. "I keep thinking about the staff. If Tyrone sends people in and it goes wrong, the non-essential staff are being moved to the kitchen level and locked access below the main event floor once the gala starts. I coordinated it with Marcus as a security protocol. He thinks it's my security team being overcautious." A pause. "It means the people in the room when things move will be guests, federal agents, my security, and me. And you." Another pause. "You can still step back from the identification role. I can have my people work from photographs. Your people don't know every face in that room. I do." She sat up straight. "I've been managing high-profile events in this city for 7 years. I know every donor, every regular, every person who should and shouldn't be there," she breathed. "That's why you need me in the room. You said so yourself." "I did." "Then that's where I'll be." He was quiet for a moment. "Lena, don't." "I was going to say, I know what you were going to say. Save it for tomorrow night." She meant it to come out harder than it did. It came out almost soft, which she hadn't intended and couldn't take back. "Get some sleep." "You too." She didn't sleep much. By 5 she was up, and by 6:30 she was at Noir House, walking the space alone in the early light, the tables set and the glassware polished and everything exactly as it should look. She stood in the center of the main dining room and turned slowly and looked at what she'd made of this place and thought, very clearly, "Nobody is taking this from me." Then she went to the kitchen and started prep and waited for the world to come to her. The gala began at 7. By 7:45, the room was at capacity, and the noise level had risen to the specific pitch of a successful event. Conversation and glass sounds and the soft percussion of service, the controlled, elegant chaos that was the thing she was best at managing. She moved through it the way she always did, reading the room at the level of someone who'd been doing it long enough that the reading was unconscious. Table 4 needed attention. The bar was running low on the Barolo. Someone near the window was trying to flag down a server who was currently occupied. She handled all of it. She also watched the doors. At 8:10, she saw the first wrong face. He was at the perimeter of the room near the east entrance, dark jacket, the glass in his hand untouched, his eyes moving across the room in a pattern that wasn't social. Not the way guests moved their eyes. Guests looked for people they knew, for the next drink, for the thing that interested them. This man was mapping. She knew the difference. She found the earpiece in her left ear. Adrian's team had fitted it that afternoon, small enough that her hair covered it, and spoke without moving her lips significantly. East entrance, dark jacket, he's not a guest. 20 seconds. Then Adrian's voice, low and controlled. "We see him. He's Tyrone. Hold your position." She held her position. She kept moving through the room the way she would have moved if none of this was happening, checking in with guests, managing her staff, keeping her breathing even. At 8:23, she saw the second one, near the kitchen access corridor, which meant he knew the layout, which meant, "Kitchen corridor," she said quietly. "He's heading toward the staff area." Intercepted. Adrian's voice clipped, then lower. "They're moving earlier than projected. Lena, I need you to..." The lights went out. Not all of them. The emergency lighting kicked in within 3 seconds, the warm, low level of it turning the dining room amber and strange. Around her, the room shifted from conversation to that specific suspended moment before panic makes a decision. 200 people in the half-dark registering that something was wrong and not yet sure how wrong. She heard the sound from the east entrance first. Not a gunshot, a concussive thud, something being breached. Then shouting, male voices, the sharp authoritative cadence of federal agents identifying themselves, and the room made its decision and went toward panic. "Everyone stay down!" Her voice came out of her with a volume she hadn't consciously produced, hard and clear across the room, and it cut through the noise because 7 years of managing rooms had given her a voice that rooms responded to. "Get away from the windows and get down. Now." People moved. Not perfectly, not without fear, but they moved. She was already crossing toward the service corridor. "Lena," Adrian's voice in her ear, sharp. "The kitchen level. The staff. Go to the kitchen level and lock the access door. The panel code is 7741. Do it now." "I know the panel code," she said, already moving. "It's my restaurant." The service corridor was dim, and she moved fast through it, past the linen storage and the manager's station and the secondary wine storage and down the half flight to the kitchen level, and she hit the access panel and punched in the code and heard the magnetic lock engage and leaned against the door with her back to it for exactly 2 seconds. Then she turned around. The kitchen was full. Her staff, 15 people, clustered between the prep stations and the walk-in corridor. The faces that ranged from terrified to furious, to the specific blank shock of people who hadn't had enough time to process what was happening. Sophia was in the back near the reach-in, her prep knife still in her hand because she'd been working when the lights changed and hadn't thought to put it down. "Listen to me," Lena said. Her voice was steady. She needed it to be steady so theirs could be. "This door is locked, and it stays locked. Nobody goes up until I tell you. Does anyone have an injury?" Heads shaking. "No." "Good. Stay together. Stay low. Do not open that door for anyone except me or Marcus." She stopped. "Or me," she said. "Only me." She pulled her phone, texted Adrian. "Kitchen secure. Staff accounted for." His response came back in 40 seconds. "Stay there." She looked at the door, at the access panel with its green light indicating locked, at the 15 people standing in her kitchen looking at her because she was the person who knew what to do. She thought about Marcus, who should have been somewhere in the building, who Adrian's people were moving out of play, who had spent 4 years standing in her office doorway with his arms crossed and his steady eyes and his particular reliable presence, and had been, underneath all of it, oriented toward her destruction. She thought about Tyrone's people in her dining room, in the room she'd rebuilt from a wreck, the room she'd spent 7 years making into something. She looked at her phone again. No additional text from Adrian. She looked at the door. "I need someone to stay at this panel," she said to the kitchen. "If anything changes, if you hear anything that sounds wrong, you do not open it." She found Sophia's eyes across the room. "You." Sophia straightened. The prep knife was still in her hand. "Okay. I'm going back up." The text said, I know what the text said. She punched her own code into the panel, the manager override, and the lock disengaged. "I'm going back up." She went through the door before anyone could finish the sentence. The service corridor was no longer empty. She heard them before she saw them. 2 sets of footsteps, moving fast from the north end. Not the measured pace of security, but the urgent, compressed pace of people with a purpose and a deadline. She pressed back against the wall beside the linen storage door and held her breath, and they came around the corner, and she saw the first man's face in the emergency light, and she didn't recognize him, and then she saw the face of the man behind him, and every muscle in her body locked. Marcus. He saw her in the same moment. The man in front of him didn't see her yet. He was facing forward, moving, and Marcus's hand was on his arm, and something happened in Marcus's face in the half second before the other man turned. Something she hadn't expected. Horror, not calculation, not the flat professional assessment of someone running an operation. Horror. The specific expression of a man who has just understood that the worst version of what he was afraid of has happened. The man in front turned and saw her, and his hand moved. Marcus hit him. Not a professional restraint, a full collision, shoulder into the man's chest, both of them into the opposite wall, the sound of it loud and ugly in the narrow corridor, and the man's arm came up and Marcus grabbed it, and they went down together and Lena was already moving. She didn't run. Running in the service corridor meant the north access door, which she didn't know what was on the other side of. She went south, back toward the kitchen level access, and she could hear the struggle behind her, and she didn't look back and she hit the panel, her code, manager override, and went through and locked it behind her. 15 faces in the kitchen looking at her. "Knife," she said to Sophia, who handed it over without hesitation, handle first, and Lena stood with her back against the locked door and her heart hitting the inside of her ribs so hard she could feel it in her teeth, and she pulled out her phone. She didn't text Adrian. She called. It rang twice. "I'm in the service corridor. We had a—" "I know," he said. The background on his end was very loud. "I need 2 more minutes. There are people in the corridor, Adrian, between me and the main level. My people are moving on it right now. 2 minutes. Keep the kitchen locked." "Marcus hit one of them," she said. "Tyrone's man. He hit him." A pause. Short. "Say that again." "In the corridor. Marcus and one of Tyrone's men. Marcus hit him. He wasn't—" She pressed her free hand against the door behind her, felt the cool metal of it. "He wasn't running the operation. He was trying to stop it." Silence on the line for 3 full seconds, which was a very long time when someone was managing an active operation. 2 minutes, Adrian said. "Don't move." She stood in the kitchen with Sophia and 14 other people and a chef's knife and the sounds of something violent working itself out above her, in her dining room, in the space she'd built from nothing, and she counted the seconds with the specific focused calm of someone who has used up all the available fear and come out the other side into something harder, and the 2 minutes felt like something longer than time. She counted anyway. Counted the way she'd learned to count during the worst services, the ones where everything was going wrong simultaneously, and the only thing that kept her functional was breaking the chaos into units small enough to manage. 1 second. 2. The sounds above her moved and changed. She could track the shape of it even through the floor and the locked door, the way you track weather through a window, by the way the light changes and the pressure shifts, and the quality of the noise tells you whether it's getting better or worse. It was getting better. She could feel it getting better the way you feel a fever break. Not all at once, but in degrees, the violence above her becoming more contained, the shouting more directional, the random percussion of bodies and furniture resolving into something that had a shape to it, an outcome. At 1 minute and 43 seconds by her count, her phone rang. "It's done," Adrian said. His voice was rough at the edges in a way it hadn't been all week. "Main level is secure. Federal team has custody of 6 of Tyrone's people and Tyrone himself." A pause. Breath. "He was in the building. Came in with the catering staff on a forged credential. We didn't expect him personally. Is anyone hurt? 2 of my security detail, neither critical." Another pause, shorter. "1 federal agent took a round in the vest. She's shaken but standing." Lena pressed her free hand flat against the kitchen door, felt the cold metal of it against her palm. "My guests. Moved to the private event room on the north side before the main confrontation. Nobody in the guest population was in the room when it went active." His voice had the careful quality of someone who understood exactly how close the margin had been and was choosing to report the outcome rather than the proximity of the alternative. "Lena, it's done," she breathed. Looked at Sophia, who was watching her from across the kitchen with the prep knife still in her hand and the specific stillness of someone waiting for a verdict. "We're coming up," Lena said into the phone. She punched the override code and opened the door and led 15 people back up the service corridor and into the light. The dining room looked like what it was, a beautiful space that had just had something violent move through it. 2 tables displaced, glassware down on the east side near where the confrontation had started, the sound of it underfoot where someone had moved fast through it. The emergency lighting had been replaced by the full room lighting, which was almost worse in its normalcy. The warm glow of the chandeliers illuminating the debris like a stage set after the performance had gone wrong. Federal agents in tactical gear, Adrian's security people, identifiable now in a way they hadn't been during the event, moving with the efficient purposefulness of a cleanup operation. And in the center of the room, zip-tied to a chair that had been pulled from table 7, Carmine Tyrone. He was smaller than she'd expected. That was the first thought she had when she saw him. Not the physical fact of the man, but the way reality has of reducing people once they're contained. 60, maybe 62, with the compact build of someone who'd kept himself functional, silver hair, a face that had the texture of someone who'd spent decades reading rooms and making calculations in them. He was looking at the table in front of him with the specific stillness of a man who was doing math. She walked past him without stopping. She had things to do. Her guests needed to be addressed, her staff needed to be accounted for, and her restaurant needed to be assessed for damage that was going to require reporting and documentation and the kind of operational management that didn't stop being necessary just because the circumstances were extraordinary. She did all of it. She spent 40 minutes moving through the space, talking to guests in the holding room. 214 people who ranged from shaken to furious to, in a few cases, running on the specific adrenaline that makes certain people almost exhilarated by events they'll spend the rest of their lives describing at dinner parties. She gave them what they needed: clarity, calm, the sense that someone responsible was present and in command. She connected the most distressed guests with the federal liaisons who had arrived along with the additional law enforcement presence. She checked in with every member of her staff individually. She found Marcus in the service corridor. He was sitting on the floor with his back against the wall, his wrists zip-tied in front of him. Adrian's people had secured him when they'd come through. Standard protocol, she understood, even if he'd been the one who'd stopped Tyrone's man from reaching the kitchen. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. There was a cut on his cheekbone that had been roughly cleaned but not properly dressed, and he looked up when he heard her footsteps, and his face did something complicated that resolved, after a moment, into the specific expression of someone who has been found out and is done pretending otherwise. She sat down on the floor across from him. The service corridor was empty. The sounds of the cleanup operation were muffled through the wall. It was just the two of them and the bare fluorescent light and 4 years of a working relationship that had apparently been built on a foundation she hadn't seen. "Tell me," she said. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at his hands. "Tyrone's people approached me 2 years before I came to Noir House," he said. His voice was flat and tired, not performing anything. "I had a problem. Gambling. Not the kind you fix, the kind that has a number attached to it and people who want that number paid and aren't patient about it." He paused. "They paid it. And then they owned the debt, which was worse. They placed you at Noir House. They were already watching the restaurant. Gerald Park had a relationship with a supplier connected to Tyrone's distribution network. Not criminal, just proximity, the kind of thing that puts you on a radar. When they heard DeLuca Capital was looking at acquiring it, they wanted eyes inside. And when the acquisition happened, they told me to watch and report. Financial operations, staff movements, anything that touched DeLuca Capital's involvement." He paused. "I didn't know about you, about why he bought it. Not at first." He looked up briefly. "When I figured it out, I told them. I'm not going to lie to you about that." She absorbed that. "The security design, the gala plan. Tyrone pressured me. He'd been building towards something bigger and he needed inside information on Adrian's security architecture." His jaw moved. "I gave him what I had." She looked at him, at the cut on his face, at his hands, at the tired truth in his eyes. "And tonight," she said, "in the corridor." He was quiet for a moment. His man was heading for the kitchen access. "I knew you'd lock the staff down there." He looked at the floor. "I put 30 people in harm's way over 2 years. I wasn't going to—" He stopped. "I wasn't going to let it end with you in a corridor with one of his people." She sat with that. The service corridor was cold in a way the kitchen hadn't been. The ventilation in this section had always run a degree or two lower than it should, which was on the facilities list, which was going to have to wait now because the facilities list was not the priority. "You're going to prison," she said. "I know. You cooperate fully. Everything you have, every communication, every contact, every piece of operational information you gave them, and everything you held back." She watched his face. "You held some back. I know you did because if you'd given them everything they'd have needed tonight to go differently than it did." He met her eyes. "Yes, You give them all of it, and you tell the truth about tonight. It won't change the outcome. No, but it's what you do anyway. She stood up, looked down at him for a moment. 4 years. The cup of coffee on her desk that she hadn't asked for. The crossed arms in the doorway. All of it real, she thought, and all of it compromised, and both things were true simultaneously, and that was just how it was. I trusted you, she said. Not angry. Not performing anything, just the fact of it, laid down between them. I know, he said. She walked back into the main room. The federal debrief took until 2 in the morning. Agent Diane Marsh was a compact woman in her mid-40s with the specific economy of movement that belonged to people who had been doing precise and difficult work for a long time. She asked Lena questions with the directness of someone who didn't have patience for anything except what was operationally relevant, and Lena answered them the same way. And somewhere in the middle of it, she became aware that Adrian was standing near the bar, watching the debrief with his arms crossed, and the flat, attentive expression he wore when he was monitoring something he wasn't part of. When Marsh finished with her, Lena walked to the bar. Adrian poured 2 glasses of water and pushed one toward her without being asked, and she drank half of it before she put it down. Tyrone, she said. Federal custody. The documentation package my team delivered to Marsh's office tonight covers 14 years of financial crime across 5 families. That goes to a grand jury within 60 days. He paused. The allied families are already distancing themselves. 2 of the 4 made contact with their legal teams within an hour of the arrests. When they find out what's in the documentation package, they'll be fighting the federal case individually, not cooperatively. So the coordination collapses. It's already collapsed. He picked up his own water glass. Set it down without drinking from it. Rao is cooperating. Marcus is cooperating. Between the 2 of them, Marsh has everything she needs to close the case without needing anything from me beyond the documentation. And you? She looked at him directly. Where does all of this leave you? He met her eyes. The DeLuca Capital legitimate operations are clean, have been for 4 years. The documentation I provided to the federal team identifies every point of historical intersection between the family business and organized crime, and it names the people involved, most of whom are either already in custody, deceased, or have been systematically removed from any operational role in the company over the past decade. A pause. My attorney has been in conversation with the federal prosecutor for 18 months. There's a cooperation agreement in place. She stared at him. You've been negotiating a cooperation agreement for 18 months. Since my father died, since I became the person who had enough information to make the agreement worth something. He said it evenly. The acquisition of Noir House was in some ways the last piece. Tyrone needed to be exposed as a direct threat, not a historical one, an active one, for the federal case to have the teeth it needed to reach the allied families. The gala was a calculated risk, and I take full responsibility for what that risk exposed you to. She breathed. You could have told me. I was trying to. You were managing me. I was... He stopped, looked at his water glass. Yes, I was managing you. I've been managing every variable I could reach for 10 years, and it's a habit that doesn't... He stopped again. His jaw was tight. You deserve better than being managed. I know that. She looked at the dining room, at the displaced tables and the broken glass still in the corner and the federal agents moving through the space she'd rebuilt. It looked like damage. It also looked underneath the damage, like itself. The bones of it were intact. The architecture that she'd come to know so well she could walk it in the dark hadn't changed. Was still there under everything that had been done to it tonight. What does it look like, one? She asked. 6 months from now. Your legitimate business, the cooperation agreement, all of it. Clean, he said. Smaller than it is now. Some of the holdings that can't be cleanly separated from the historical operations will be dissolved. The international investment structure survives. Noir House survives. A pause. I survive, legally. There's civil exposure on some of the historical activity, but the criminal exposure is covered by the agreement. And you stay in New York. That depends on things I don't know yet. He looked at her. Things I'd like to know. If there's any version of the next conversation where that's possible to discuss. She looked back at him, at the cut on his left hand that she hadn't noticed before. Sometime in the evening, something had opened the skin across 2 knuckles, and he hadn't mentioned it, and it had dried without being dressed. She reached across the bar and picked up a cocktail napkin and held it out. He looked at it, then at her. She put it down on the bar near his hand and took her water glass and pushed off the bar stool. "Come find me after the federal team clears out," she said. "We'll finish the conversation." The federal team cleared out at 3:15. The last agent to leave was Marsh, who paused at the door and looked back at Lena with an expression that was as close to acknowledgement as her face appeared capable of producing. "You managed a clean evacuation of the non-essential personnel," Marsh said, "under active conditions, without training." "I've been managing rooms under pressure for a long time," Lena said. Marsh looked at her for a moment more. Then she left. The restaurant was empty. The damage was visible in the full silence of the space. Not catastrophic, nothing structural, but real. The broken glass, the displaced furniture, the scuff marks on the floor near the east entrance where something heavy had gone down. She walked through it slowly, the way you walk through a space you're assessing rather than simply inhabiting, making the inventory automatically. Adrian was at the far end of the room near the window that looked out over the street when she completed the circuit and came to where he was standing. The street below was quiet. 3 in the morning in Manhattan, which wasn't the same as quiet anywhere else in the world, but was close enough that the city noise had softened to a low register, the distant sound of something, the occasional light moving through the dark. "Marcus?" he said. He hadn't turned when she walked up. "I should have identified him sooner." "You identified him before anything irreversible happened." "He had access to you for weeks that I—" "He also stopped one of Tyrone's people from reaching my staff tonight." She stood beside him, looked out at the street. "He made choices that put people in danger, and then he made a choice that pulled some of that back. I don't know what to do with that yet. But it's true." Adrian was quiet. "People are complicated," she said. "That's not an excuse. It's just what I've learned from managing them for 7 years. They're capable of more than one thing at a time." He looked at her then. In profile, in the dark of the window, she could see the tiredness in him properly, the full weight of what this week had cost, sitting in his face without the professional armor over it. "I have something to tell you," he said. "Something I should have told you the first night." She waited. "The investigator who found you," he said. "The journalist's photo. My team ran it 6 months ago." He paused. "I came to New York and I sat outside this restaurant for 2 evenings before I made any contact with Gerald Park." She looked at him. "You sat outside." "I needed to know—" He stopped, started again with the specific care of someone choosing words because they matter. "I needed to know if you were okay, if you'd built something, if you were—" Another stop. "I'd spent 10 years imagining the worst things, all the things that could have happened in the gap after the protection detail lost you. And I needed to see, before I did anything that might disrupt what you'd made, that what you'd made was worth protecting." "And?" "I watched you do closing on a Tuesday night," he said. "You were the last one out. You locked the front door, and you stood on the sidewalk for about 30 seconds before you walked to the subway, and you looked at the building the way people look at things they've made that they're not sure they deserve." Something in his voice had gone quiet in a way that wasn't the professional kind of quiet. "I knew then that I was going to buy the restaurant. I knew I'd probably blow up the life you'd built just by being in it. And I bought it anyway because you're not a man who walks away from things he's decided," she said. "No." He met her eyes. "But I'm trying to learn to ask before I act. I'm aware I have not done well at that this week." She held his gaze. "You did terribly at it." "Yes." "You made decisions about my life without telling me the stakes." "Yes." "You put me in a room with an active operation and called it a controlled environment." "Yes." "And you sat outside my restaurant for 2 evenings watching me lock up before you bought it, which is it." She exhaled. "I don't have a clean word for what that is." "I know. It's the kind of thing that would be deeply disturbing if the context were different." "I know." and I'm not sure the context makes it not disturbing. Also fair? She looked at the street. A cab moved through the intersection below, slow and yellow in the dark. She watched it until it turned. I'm angry, she said. I want you to understand that. Not at the choice you made 10 years ago. I think I understand that now, and I think you probably saved my life, and I think you paid an enormous price for it that I'm only beginning to understand the shape of. She paused. But I'm angry about the 10 years, about what was taken, about the fact that there wasn't a way that included me in the decision. I know, he said. It was becoming the answer he gave when he'd run out of defenses and was just telling the truth. And I'm going to be angry about it for a while, she said. That doesn't go away because I understand the reason. I'm not asking it to. She turned and looked at him fully. Then what are you asking? He turned toward her too. The distance between them was small, had been small for the last 10 minutes, the way distance between people collapses naturally when neither of them moves away from it. In the window light, his face was tired and unguarded, and more like the face she'd known at 26 than at any point in the past 2 weeks. And she thought that this was probably what happened when someone finally put down everything they'd been carrying long enough to stand without it. I'm asking for the chance to be present, he said. Not to manage, not to protect from a distance. Present, in whatever way you decide that looks like. If it looks like nothing, I accept that. But if there's a version where it looks like something, I'd like to know what that version requires. She stood with that for a moment, with the weight of it and the history behind it and the question of what 10 years of silence costs and whether the payment has a duration or just a shape that you carry forward. It requires honesty, she said, before the fact, not after. Yes. It requires that when you're building a federal cooperation case that involves a gala in my restaurant, you tell me before you decide whether I'm a variable in the plan. Something like the ghost of something moved across his face. Yes. And it requires that you understand this. She gestured, a small motion that encompassed the room, the restaurant, the work of the past 7 years, is not a background to whatever you're dealing with. This is what I've built. It's the center. Everything else has to work around it. I understand that, he said. I understood it the first time I watched you lock that door. She looked at him for a long moment, at everything in his face that she could read now, and everything she couldn't yet, and the knowledge that the ratio would probably shift over time if she let it. She picked up one of the undamaged glasses from the bar behind her and poured 2 fingers of the Barolo that Danny had restocked before the service and hadn't been properly opened during the chaos, and she handed one glass to Adrian and kept one and leaned against the bar and looked at her restaurant. He stood beside her and looked at it too. It needs work, she said. We'll open the facilities line tomorrow. I'll open the facilities line tomorrow, she said. You can be consulted if I decide consultation is useful. She heard the breath he let out beside her. Not quite a laugh, not quite relief, but something in the neighborhood of both. Understood. They stood in the quiet of the emptied room and drank the wine, and the city moved outside the windows with its normal indifference to the things that happened inside the lit spaces it contained. After a while, she said, What happened to your hand? He looked at his left hand, at the dried cut across the knuckles. East entrance, when Tyrone came through with his people. You were in the room. Yes. You were supposed to be managing from the security position. I was managing from wherever I needed to be. She set down her wine glass and went behind the bar and found the first aid kit under the service station, which was where first aid kits lived in restaurants that were run properly. She came back around and stood in front of him and opened it on the bar and cleaned the cut with the specific efficiency of someone who had dealt with kitchen injuries for 7 years, who understood that the body had to be maintained because it was the instrument everything else ran on. He let her do it without comment. His hand was still in hers, and she could feel his pulse in his wrist, steady and real, and she put a bandage on the cut and pressed the edges flat and let go. Thank you, he said. She put the first aid kit away, picked up her wine. Don't make a thing of it. I'm not making a thing of it. You have a face that's about to make a thing of it. My face is doing nothing. Your face is doing something. She looked at him sidelong. It's fine. Don't say anything. He didn't say anything. He drank his wine and looked at the room, and she could see in his peripheral expression the thing he wasn't saying. And she thought that there was something to be said for people who could hold things without immediately converting them into words. It was a quality she'd spent her adult life cultivating, and she recognized it in him as something real, not performed. The wine was good. The room needed work. The city was still there outside the windows, indifferent and alive, doing what cities do. She thought about the woman who had stood on a sidewalk 7 months ago, not knowing someone was watching her from a car, who had locked her restaurant and walked to the subway and thought about tomorrow's inventory and the supplier issue and the thing the evening chef needed to discuss about the fall menu. Who had been, in that moment, exactly as alone as she'd believed herself to be. And also not alone at all, in the specific way that people can occupy the same space in someone else's mind across enormous distances, across silence, across a decade of absence that had been absence in form only. She thought about all the time, the sheer weight of it. And then she tried, very deliberately, to put it down. Not forgive, not forget, not paper over the cost of it with the relief of the outcome, just put it down. Let the past be the shape it was, carried but not dragged. Let this moment be what it actually was. Two people standing in a room they'd both paid to be in different currencies, over different years, drinking wine in the dark after surviving something difficult. That was enough to work with. That was actually more than most people got. The reopening, she said, after repairs. What about it? I want to do it without it being a security operation. He glanced at her, define without. Normal event, guests, no tactical gear under the catering uniforms. She paused. You can be there, as a guest, not as the owner managing a variable. He looked at her for a moment. As a guest. With a reservation, like a person. I own the restaurant. I know. I'm asking you to pretend for one evening that you're a person who made a reservation because you heard good things about the food. The ghost of something moved across his face again, more committed to being an expression this time. And if I like what I find when I get there? She looked at him steadily. Then you come back. And we figure out the rest of it as we go, like people who are still in the process of knowing each other. She picked up her glass. Which is what we are. He was quiet for a moment. Then, when's the reopening? 3 weeks, if the facility's work moves fast. It'll move fast. I know it will. She finished her wine, set the glass down with a small, precise sound. I'm going home. There's a car? Yes. Not an armored convoy. A car, he said. One car. Good. She picked up her bag from behind the bar, moved toward the front of the restaurant, toward the door, through the space she was already beginning to see in its repaired version, the version it was going to be in 3 weeks, the room that had been a wreck and become something and survived a night that could have ended it and would instead just be part of its history. Every room that's worth anything has a history. The ones that last are the ones that can hold it without being buried by it. At the door, she stopped and looked back. He was still at the bar, his wine in his hand, watching her with the particular attention of someone who has been watching someone for a long time and intends, if permitted, to keep doing it. 3 weeks, she said. 3 weeks, he said. She opened the door. The city came in. The sound and the cold and the particular quality of 4 in the morning when Manhattan has run itself down to its lowest register, and you can almost hear the machinery of it beneath the noise. She stood in the doorway for a moment with the city at her back and the restaurant behind her, and the 10 years somewhere in the space between them where it would probably always be, because things like that don't disappear, they just find their place. Then she stepped out. The door closed behind her. She walked to the car. She didn't look back at the window, though she knew he was at it. Some things you know without checking. Some things you've known for long enough that looking would be redundant. The car pulled out and moved into the street, and the city opened up around her. All its lights and indifference and motion, the thing that had held her for 7 years without asking anything back. She watched it pass through the window and thought about the morning, about inventory, about the facilities call she was going to make at 9 o'clock, about the menu for the reopening, which was going to be different. Better, actually. She had ideas she'd been sitting on for months, that the old ownership had never approved, and that she was going to implement now without asking anyone's permission. She thought about 3 weeks. She thought about a man with a reservation sitting at a table in a room she'd built, eating food she'd chosen, in a restaurant that bore the name of the darkness it had been designed to push back against. Noir house, dark house, the place you make into the place you meant it to be. She looked out the window at the city going past. She breathed. She let the night move. It was enough, for now. It was more than enough. It was the beginning of whatever came after the end of the old story. Not a clean page, nothing was ever a clean page, but the same page turned over to the side that still had space on it. She was still writing it. That was the part that mattered. That was the part that had always mattered.